Hi, welcome back to 30 Days of Going Inside because we can't go outside. And today is day 14 and it's all about acceptance. My son is having to practice a lot of acceptance at the moment because he's 18 today and it's a bit rubbish to have your 18th birthday in lockdown. But happy birthday, Laurie. So what do I mean when we're talking about acceptance? The first thing I want to say is that acceptance is not a state. That sometimes we hear ourselves and people saying, oh, I've accepted this or I've accepted that. And for me, it's less about getting into a state of acceptance and more about an ongoing practice. And it's something that we have to sort of continue to work at, and there will be days or moments where we're more able and willing to be with something, and there'll be other days when we're less willing and less able to be with things, when we're a bit more resistant. And I guess it's about starting to notice the difference. What does it feel like when I'm practicing acceptance? And what does it feel like when I'm practicing resistance? And we've been noticing, haven't we, in the other videos, how often we're quite resistant to difficult feelings that might show up inside. And we can also be quite resistant to some of the thoughts and things that show up. And we can be resistant to things in the present moment, but we can also practice a lot of resistance towards our histories. And we can also practice a lot of acceptance towards things that have happened in the past. So I'm going to tell you a short story now in order to illustrate some of the things that we've been talking about yesterday and we'll be talking about today and tomorrow. And this story I call Two Monks. So there were two monks and they were going on a pilgrimage, a religious journey. And they'd been walking for many days. And at one point they came to a stream, and by the stream was a lady, and she was in a very beautiful dress. And she wanted to get to the other side, but she wasn't sure that she could get across the stream. So one of the monks, the first monk, lifted the lady, carried her across the stream, and then they carried on their journey. The monks had carried on walking for quite a long time, many hours. And then after a while, the second monk turned to the first monk and said, I can't believe you carried that lady over the stream. You know, on our religious journey, we mustn't touch women, we mustn't touch another human being, and you broke all of our vows. What were you thinking? I can't believe you did this. And the first monk turned to the second monk and said, I placed the lady down by the stream several hours ago. Why is it that you are still carrying her? So often, the things we do to resist being with things as they are create so much more suffering. In mindfulness, we sometimes use this distinction of primary and secondary suffering. And we can look at this in the context of our current situation with regards to lockdown and the restrictions that are being placed on our movements and our lives at the moment by coronavirus. So if we see lockdown as our primary experience or our primary suffering, and then we can think about how some days we might be able to be more accepting of these restrictions and other days we might be a bit more resistant. For example, I might say to myself, when is this going to end? Why now? What if my life is never the same? I'm missing out on so many things. It's not fair. I can't cope with this any longer. And you can start to see how, as we resist our primary experience, we end up with something that is much larger and, just as in the story of the two monks, much heavier. And this is our secondary suffering, our secondary experience. That maybe we can let go of some of these layers of rumination, of predicting the future, of going over and over the past, of trying to fix something that's showing up inside a thought or a feeling or something that's happened in our history that actually we're never going to be able to alter. And if we return to the original example of lockdown and all the restrictions that are being placed on our lives, I know for me that it's when I bring into focus the values, the why, the meaning in this, that I find it much easier to practice acceptance of these restrictions. So when I remember that staying at home is saving lives and is protecting the vulnerable and the key workers, then choosing to practice acceptance makes a bit more sense. I don't always have to like it. It doesn't have to be easy. But when I remain focused on the values, the reasons, it really helps me stay on track with the willingness and the acceptance. Between now and tomorrow, I want you all to just think about what does it feel like when I'm practicing acceptance? And also just notice when perhaps you might be practicing resistance or when you might be resisting something. So this might be about, watching the kettle boil. Am I resisting this time? Am I kind of willing it on? Or am I being accepting of this opportunity, this pause in my life? It might be about the fact that it's raining, which it's not right now, but it might be about something to do with that, something that you probably don't have much control over. And notice what it feels like when you're practicing acceptance and when you're practicing resistance. And I'm going to leave you with another metaphor, which we call the quicksand metaphor, which I hope will lead nicely into tomorrow's video. Now, when we fall into quicksand, which luckily doesn't happen very often, what tends to happen, and if you just think about that idea of falling into quicksand for a moment, the majority of us are going to fight, right? We're going to resist, we're going to scrabble to get out, we're going to be panicked, and we're going to try and get out of there as quickly as possible. And what we know is that in doing that, because we're pressing all of our weight down through our feet and we're upright, we're actually just going to sink quicker and quicker. So the more we struggle in quicksand, the quicker we sink. And what we need to do in quicksand, here's your tip, is we need to actually let go of this resistance and spread out. We need to come into full contact with our body and the quicksand. So we need to spread out our surface area to be as broad as possible so that as much of our body as possible is coming into contact with this very thing that we're terrified of. And as we spread our bodies out, the quicksand gives us up. And so it's this idea of coming into full contact with this very thing that we don't want and we're resisting that we're going to explore tomorrow. And tomorrow is all about willingness. So your challenge is to notice resistance, notice acceptance, think about the quicksand metaphor and the two monks, and I'll see you tomorrow for willingness.